Hello, everyone. My name is Jason White, Chairman of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. The collaborative is a community of practice of organizations that do reentry work across the country. I'm also the Senior Director of Operations and Strategy at OIC of America, one of the longest lasting African-American organizations that have been started in the 1960s. That being said, today I'm hosting a panel discussion on a topic, where do we go from here? The impact of the global pandemic and the national racial awakening on the labor market and what it means for returning citizens who are the persons we serve. Now, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I would like to take a quick moment to acknowledge a few individuals. First, I'd like to acknowledge the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative Steering Committee members, Christopher Watler from Center for Employment Opportunity, Caitlin Dawkins from FHI 360, Greg Wise from Strive International, and Jennifer Lynch from Goodwill Industries International. These are the folks that we've been working with for the past few months to bring this collaborative together. So we are very grateful for their contribution. I also want to recognize James Haynes, President and CEO of OIC of America, and the leadership of the organization and staff. They have graciously provided some seed resources to get the collaborative going. So we're so grateful for their contribution. We also want to recognize the U.S. Department of Labor. While the department does not endorse or support this specific collaborative, there has been quite a bit of investment made in the individual organizations, which is kind of what has led us to deciding to start this collaboration. And finally, I do want to recognize all the organizations that are currently being represented on this medium. Thank you for considering collaborating and for partnering with us. So we are here today in a critical time in the history of our nation. As a re-entry workforce collaboration, we are very concerned with how some of our some of the recent events have been affecting the individuals that we do serve. Therefore, we have assembled a panel of experts in their respective field to have a conversation and really wrestle through some of the matters that we're dealing with in real time. So today we have 5 panelists. Our first panelist is John Vining, the Director of Human Resources at Brown's Superstores. They're based here in Pennsylvania, but also cover other states in the Northeast section. This particular company is well known in this region for hiring individuals that have a background. So thanks for joining us today, John. We also want to introduce Dennis Matthew. He's a Senior Vice President of the New England region at Comcast. Comcast, as you are well aware, is a national employer. They employ over 190,000 individuals each year. And the company prizes itself on focusing on hiring a diverse workforce and employing inclusive hiring strategies. Also is Jean Liev, who is the Executive Director of Dave Kilbread Foundation. And the foundation actually focuses on mobilizing businesses that are focusing on second chance hiring. So we're really excited to hear some insights from Genevieve today. And then also there's Dr. Susan Crystal Mansour, who is the Vice President for Program Impact from the National Restaurant Association Education Foundation. As you're well aware, the restaurant industry is one of those industries that have been most affected by COVID-19. And the industry have historically been very open to hiring returning residents. So we're very curious to hear some thoughts of what's happening in the restaurant industry and what we should anticipate as we face the new normal. And last but certainly not least is Donovan West, President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce that covers the tri-state area consisting of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. As the name states, the Chamber focusing on supporting African American owned businesses, providing a level of support and also resources to help them to succeed in these competitive markets. We're going to start with John Vining from ShopRite. Please, John.
Sure. So I think probably the most significant change to our industry with the onset of COVID-19 was being recognized as essential workers. So our associates right off the bat were recognized as essential workers and therefore working through the crisis in the certainly from the early onset. And then from a challenge perspective, we obviously dealt with several different, being right there on the front lines, dealt with several different governmental regulations that were shifting daily, hourly, and sometimes multiple times in a day. And then also the challenge of being staffed to do an increased volume due to some of the other retailers being closed, specifically restaurant industry. Folks were eating from home a lot more. And so we were seeing volume increases while dealing with either associates dealing with pre-existing conditions or fear of COVID not working, and then trying to increase our employment during that time while recognizing social distancing, training, and probably went to the largest challenge to that was just capacity specifically. So fortunately, we have some relationships with community-based organizations that do workforce development that helped us expand our capacity through those relationships and to allow us to continue to actually hire at a higher rate than we normally do for our busiest season. We were hiring at rates that are higher than our normal, like Thanksgiving holiday season hiring, and doing so in a time frame where we're not accustomed to doing that while dealing with the challenges of the pandemic. So we had to shift several of our procedures to accommodate that. But I don't know that we could have made it through without some of the partnerships of the workforce development community around us, and sort of them, by having a separate facility, having some capacity for them to do some training offsite and continue to funnel employees towards us. One of which was doing our partnership with Uplift Solutions was doing virtual learning, and then although not graduating full cohorts, through their virtual learning, they were able to continue to feed us a pipeline of associates who were trained and developed outside of us, which without having that, we probably would not have been able to meet our hiring needs and therefore meet our customers' demands. So I think those things are all very, very important. And I'm happy to be here with the group today. We've been a second chance employer for over 20 years. And at this point, currently, almost approximately, give or take, 20% of our workforce are returning citizens. And our relationships with the various organizations who do that work have been beneficial to us over the course of the last 20 years.
Well, thank you, John. We're so grateful for your partnership. John emphasized how closely they work with workforce development organization. I have had firsthand experience in seeing that at work, and it's so encouraging to see employees like your company partnering with entities like us. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, dear John. Dennis, we're gonna turn our focus on you for a little bit, for you to talk a little bit about how Comcast has been experiencing changes, what is good despite the fact that this is a difficult time, but anything that is also challenging as well.
Sure, great to be with you all. Dennis Matthew, I'm the Senior Vice President of our Western New England region. So operate in 5 states, including Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and a little bit of New York. It's my first year in this role. Prior to that, I was at headquarters. And so quite a, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but challenging first year where we've had to really turn our operations inside out with COVID-19 and some of the things that have come up. From a customer perspective, we knew that connectivity was critical. And so we have a program called Internet Essentials, which is essentially internet product for $10 a month that we provide to help bridge the digital divide for the community, for qualifying communities. We made that free for the first 60 days for any customers that wanted to sign up. We also opened up all of our Wi-Fi hotspots to anybody that wanted access. We started waiving late fees and discontinued any disconnections of folks who are having challenges with the bills. So lots of operational work we had to do to implement that, but we wanted to be there for our customers during these challenging times, and we knew connectivity was critical. A lot of work also on the plant to make sure that we could keep up with the changing demand, where we went from having our peak time in the evenings to now having peak time all day, every day, and everybody jumping on video conference like this. I mean, we've never seen video conference being used even to a fraction of what it was before. So lots of work from that perspective. We moved tens of thousands of people from offices and call centers to their homes within 10 days. That's something that if you had told me prior to COVID-19 and said, hey, Dennis, we should do a project where we just move everybody home, I would have said, sounds great. That will take us about 3 years to get accomplished. With all the policies and HR and technology and blah, blah, blah. We started packing up people's desktops, putting them in boxes and sent them home. Like even, whether you had laptop, desktop, didn't matter. We knew we had to get everybody out of the facilities so that we could limit exposure. We had to close some of our stores or quickly put up protective equipment to protect the folks that were in the stores. We had to drastically change our procedures for our technicians who had to still help people get connected to internet, but not be in people's homes necessarily. Bring the equipment to the customers' homes, help walk them through the installation process from the window or from the door. As you can imagine, we wanted to help our customers, but at the same time wanted to be sensitive to not putting them at risk, especially in the early days when it was really difficult to determine how risky all of this was. And so lots of changes. I think, the good thing, the good that's come out of it is it's helped us, it's tested our resiliency, our ability to manage change. It's honestly given us a chance to do some things in terms of virtual work environments that we would just not have done because of our culture. We just felt like everybody had to be in an office. And so now we're finding that that's not necessarily the case, but it's been a busy few months to say the least.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I was on a call recently with some representative from the city of Philadelphia, and I heard something very interesting that one of the representatives shared. He said that in the past, an individual needed a computer to find a job, but we are transitioning into an era now where individuals need a computer to keep a job. So as I hear you talking about this, that is what came to my mind. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it is amazing that Comcast was able to move that masses of employees in such a short period. Thank you. So Sue, what has been, what has changed, what has been challenging, and what has been good when you think about the restaurant industry and your organization?
So hi, everybody. I'm Sue Crystal Mansour. I'm the Vice President of Program Impact for the mouthful of the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. I have heard that it may change in the near future. And so when I speak to the challenges and what's good, I actually can kind of speak across two hats. And one is I work for the foundation. And as a foundation, we are all about empowering and recognizing the value of all individuals using restaurants and food service as our vehicle and getting them on a new trajectory and employed and advanced and more educated. So that's what we do. And then we leverage and we work with our association partners for the restaurant industry. So I'm gonna start with the challenges. On the restaurant side, you know the challenges. You watched it within the first 2 weeks of COVID shutdowns, the industry just became unemployed and the unemployment numbers were staggering and phenomenal. And so when we then cross over, what does this mean and what does this mean for the foundation? I'll say that it's an emotional environment. There is increasing stress and triggers and tension, and you have all of these people trying to do their best, but it's filtering all through this intense and tense environment. And this was just exacerbated by the racial tensions really coming to light as well. And then what is the other big challenge was the loss of staff to committed projects of our stakeholders, whether it was our state restaurant association partners or our community-based organization partners or the shutdown of programs just due to this. And that made it difficult to then start moving and continuing through. And this goes through staff and restaurants as well. You know, here we're creating community collaboratives and we're all working together and these people are now gone. And that became the challenge. But what's good? Well, we have a really incredible community. As soon as the impact was realized, we had all of these donors reach out and say, how can we help the restaurant industry? We want to help. These people are so important to us. And in a 3-week time span, we set up a restaurant employee relief fund. And within 3 weeks, we had commitments of over $20 million. And it was all the way from very large donors down to individual donors. And we were able to stand up this application process. And in the 15 minutes that we stood it up and had it open, 60,000 people applied for an application. And so that gives you the magnitude of the challenge. And then it all of a sudden makes you realize how important the industry was. And then now, as we pivot out of that, it then had these individuals listening to us. It gave us a larger and a louder voice. And people are asking us now, how can we support the industry? And with this larger and louder voice, we were able to discuss vulnerable populations and what makes them vulnerable and allow us to see the needs and then align the programs and the industry to those needs. So we've talked a lot about how resources and trainings went online, and then it became, well, who accesses them and who can't access them and how do we address those barriers? And that communities are coming together and that they've lost their favorite place to go and they want to see that restaurant reopen and they want to see those workers taken care of, and what's the barrier to doing that. And what I think creates this great opportunity for the understanding of what is the need for good training, how it impacts long-term the employment and the reopenings, and then what are the barriers to it being equitable across all those groups.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. Thank you. I mean, I can't even imagine the emotions that goes along with the fear of losing one's business. But I'm very encouraged to hear that the community came together so quickly and contributed so much resources to help. I'm sure it would have been great if it was more, but I'm glad that there were some resources that were provided, and I'm trusting that it will help a number of those businesses succeed. Okay, so I think we're at with Genevieve. You mind sharing with us your thoughts on what has changed, what's challenging, and what is good as you engage with multiple organizations or businesses that are hiring folks that have a background?
I think since we're in this moment of COVID-19, right, everything has changed. I can't think of a facet of our lives that hasn't categorically shifted. And that applies across the board in organizations. So when we look at our work specifically, as far as challenges that come up, a lot of our work is done either over the phone, which is okay. We've been able to maintain that, but also a lot of it is in person. It's relationship building. It's building trust so that organizations and companies trust us to give them good advice and to kind of hold their hand through becoming second chance employers. And so we were getting ready to launch our next program this past April, which was entirely in person over 9 months. And so we had to pause that and completely shift our strategy and how we meet our clients and put them through a cohort model of learning. And so we'll be relaunching that org in October as kind of a dress rehearsal, and then again in January formally as a virtual learning cohort for corporations. So that has been quite the lesson in learning. Virtual learning is very different than in-person learning, and so being able to plan for that and kind of overcompensate for things that we would have traditionally done and now can't. So that for us has been rather challenging. For the companies that we've worked with, and we continue to reach out and just kind of check in and see how they're doing, it has certainly created massive rifts within their workforces. So we see the pendulum swing from mass layoffs all the way over to we don't have enough talented people to get into these positions. And those tend to be those what's been dubbed essential workplaces right now. So like grocery stores and things like that. We continue to see a lot of need over there. When it comes to the clients that we do consulting work with, all of those current contracts have been put on pause. It's been incredibly encouraging as we kind of survey the folks that we're currently working with to find that their priorities of second chance employment haven't shifted. So when they're able to hire again, when that changes, they have all said it hasn't shifted. We still want to be educated, informed, and do this thoughtfully and intentionally, which has been a huge blessing to hear that. It just means that their timelines are incredibly different. And so we all have to be really flexible with that. As far as the organization that we are actually the sister company of Dave's Killer Bread, times of crisis strangely don't seem to impact us quite the same as others, because at the end of the day, everyone still has to eat. So people are still purchasing our products in stores, which allows us to really stay in existence and not have to worry about our status as kind of the branch of here's how to do good work in your organization. So we get to stay around, thankfully. So those are the biggest shifts. I know we're probably short on time. I'll stop there and get to the next juicy questions.
Thank you so much. It's very encouraging to hear that employers are still considering hiring as second chance employers. That's very, thank you so much for sharing. Donovan, what are your thoughts from the African American Chamber of Commerce perspective?
Yeah, thanks again for the inclusion. I really appreciate that, Jason. For the African American Chamber of Commerce, we've had to make sure that we take a very differentiated approach in terms of, how we get the information out to our audience. The first thing that we did is we facilitated a virtual summit. It was in partnership with Philly Live, and we had council members, Isaiah Thomas, we had Senator Vincent Hughes, also PIDC, and Nevin, she participated. And so we basically provided an information session where we talked about how best to navigate and access the COVID-19 relief funds that the city was releasing. As you would imagine, that was the first wave of funds. There was initially $9 million. They were able to secure another, I think 5 million or 4 million, something like that. So there was about 13 million, but the request came in and they were north of 81 million. So, we had to participate in terms of ensuring as many minority businesses were able to apply as possible. So we did that, and then we followed up the following week in partnership with the SBA to get some more information out to our audience in regards to, the PPP funds, more information about the EIDL loan. And we did that in partnership with the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast Administrator for the SBA, as well as the White House Director for Innovation and Entrepreneurism. I think Ashley Bell. So he was able to assist in that partnership, also with the African American caucus that we had out of Pennsylvania. So we were able to get something going. That was a town hall conference call. So, we had the virtual summit, and then we went to the conference call setting where we were able to, again, access another couple hundred people. And then, then we were able to leverage another relationship with an organization called Lendistry. They are a nationally known community-based CDFI that was awarded a $100 million project with Goldman Sachs to target some of the most impoverished cities in the country. And so 10 million of that was earmarked for Philadelphia. So we were able to facilitate a number of information sessions where they were able to walk us through their portal, provide some additional context for, what information was needed, and help out a lot of our business owners who, as you already know, and it was publicized widely, did not have a relationship with a bank, right? And so they became that entity that could actually be able to help facilitate, access to those funds. And so other relationships we leveraged to make sure that we were able to get the information out there. On a weekly basis, we teamed up with another radio station called WRD, 96.1 FM. And every Monday during a segment called Livelihood from 6 to 6:30, we provided the audience with updates in terms of access to funds, relief funds, and things of that nature. So just making sure that, whether it was radio or the internet, conference calls, just really making sure that we provided a very comprehensive and holistic approach to getting this information out to our audience. From a programming standpoint, definitely, challenging, as we now had to switch over to a totally virtual space. We had workshops Tuesdays and Thursdays on different topics pertaining to, businesses surviving and thriving. We still continue with, a routine where we're doing that. Just as a matter of fact, on Friday we have, tomorrow we have Rebecca Reinhart, and then Friday we have Congressman Dwight Evans. So we're providing some more updates on access to funding, the fact that PPP is about to run out next Tuesday, getting ready for the $100 million that is focused on historically disadvantaged businesses that should be coming down the pike next week as well. So just preparing as much of our businesses, period, not even our members, but just minority businesses, period, for access to these funds. So, the goal is, of course, to make sure that we demonstrate partnerships, collaborative effort, and really for our businesses on another level, we engage them in some level of emotional intelligence, right? In terms of giving them the space to properly mourn their business, because as you may or may not know, we're talking about probably 40% of businesses not returning from the impact of COVID-19. And so how to pause, right, reflect, mourn the loss of your business in its latest iteration, pivot in terms of look at what skill sets they have, what technical skills they have that can be applicable to a post-COVID-19 environment, and then to go into pursuit, right? So pause, pivot, pursuit, to engagement, that type of dialogue is really where we are, in terms of helping them, not just from an emotional intelligence standpoint, but also from a critical thinking standpoint, before it becomes, too paralyzing and they become a final, casualty of what's happening, today. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but that's where we're at.
Thank you, Donovan. It was very encouraging to keep hearing you use the word access, because as we're all aware, that's one of the biggest challenge, especially faced by the African American community. So thanks for all the work that you've been doing in this period where we're all shut in, so to say. So
thank you.
So we're going to transition now to some specific questions that were thoughtfully prepared by the steering committee and tailor to the respective panelists. We're actually going to start with Denise from Comcast, and we're just going to jump straight into it in the interest of time. So Dennis, as a national employer that hires over 190,000 persons across the country, Comcast seems to place a heavy emphasis on diversity and inclusion as in their hiring practice. As you think about the fact that after COVID-19, you're going to have a higher supply of labor, so to say, and pool of individuals to choose from, how do you think that you could say philosophy or value will be maintained as you move forward post COVID-19? You're muted.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been with Comcast for 15 years, and I've really been excited about the enhanced focus on diversity and inclusion. I would say, call it the last 5 or 6 years. But that being said, this is still a journey, and I'm learning every day what that journey needs to look like. I'll give a small example, and I think it talks a little bit about what we're doing here at Comcast. I pride myself in being focused on diversity and inclusion, in being a leader that focuses on emotional intelligence and empathy, and these are all conversations that we have. But in light of George Floyd's killing and the protest that took place, I was having a conversation with my daughter. And I have 2 daughters, 11 and 9, and one is a bit more light-skinned, one is a bit darker-skinned, and I know that she's had some issues at school. And so we asked her, how are you processing all of this? And she said, Dad, well, I don't really have to deal with racism. And I said, well, I know that's not true, because she's had folks tell her that, hey, her skin is dirty, she needs to go take a bath, those types of things. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I don't have to worry like some of my classmates that their daddy may not make it home alive. And that was very impactful to me, because I realized that she had a level of empathy that honestly I still did not. I did not appreciate what my Black team members and teammates, the reality that they face. And so we have been having some very open and transparent conversations, and we are equipping our leaders to have these conversations. And these conversations have allowed us to hear from our teammates and to share about how we're processing what's happened over the last few weeks, so that it can influence how we operate going forward. There are a lot of tactical things that need to happen. Brian Roberts announced that we will be investing $100 million, $75 million in cash over the next 3 years to fight racism and inequality. And so we're going to be working through how does that funding get deployed to local organizations that we work with today, like the Urban League and others. From a hiring perspective, we need to be even more adamant on ensuring that we have diverse slates, so that when we're hiring, we are looking at candidates that are diverse. And I'll be quite frank, a year ago when I was hiring a vice president and my recruiting team is a diverse team, and I said, hey, I want a diverse slate. I would like to review a diverse slate. This was in the space of IoT. The first slate that came in had 10 white males. I said, hey, this is not diverse. This is the opposite of diverse. And they said, well, this is, Internet of Things. It's a complicated space. There's not a lot of candidates. I said, that doesn't make sense. Feels like we need to take another run at this. And then we had a few more iterations. And so I bring that up to say we have to hold our leaders accountable and our recruiters accountable to say, no, we're not going to take the easy way out. And guess what? I ended up hiring a female person of color for that role. seems like we were able to find a diverse person when we really, worked at it. And so I think these last few weeks will help us continue this focus, really push even further into this space. And as a leader here, my goal is to continue to ensure that my leaders are accountable to our overarching diversity and inclusion goals as well.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And we are going to be looking to you for you to hold Comcast accountable. So please do.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So Sue, we're going to actually ask you to share your thoughts on, in light of the Restaurant Association being one of the largest employers of returning citizens. You did touch on this to a certain extent earlier, but I'm curious to hear if you have any additional thoughts in terms of how do you see things changing post COVID-19? Because there are a lot of individuals that would typically rely on the restaurant industry that have a background, and things have changed drastically. So I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to make one point from before about the relief fund, because I think it's important to this, that it was actually not for businesses, but for employees. And in designing that, we basically made it as low a bar for proof of documentation as possible. So, no long questionnaires, no citizenship, no social, no this, just proof. And that goes to this issue of these vulnerable populations that they serve and access to things, and how do we make people aware and then get them ready to apply. In speaking about the industry, we during this whole period were applying for many grants related to apprenticeship, which is one of the things that we do. And we had a lot of discussions with departments of labor in each state, and they said, well, really, can you do this right now with the state of your industry? And I said, prior to this, going into COVID, if you looked at every dollar spent on food, 50% of it was spent on food prepared outside the home. And it's not like miraculously people learned how to cook. And in pulling the data from the association, we find out that, in fact, the sectors within our industry that are doing off-premises businesses, sort of that order out, where your quick service and your coffee and your snack places up at 75%. And in looking at adults, the general population, 68% of them said that they had ordered out in the past week. And then you had 83% reporting that they really wanted to eat on premises more than they did. And 50% saying they wanted to order out more than they did. And all of this is to say, so there's this demand that didn't go away. And so the industry, everybody's waiting for these, the restaurants to open up. And the New York Times had a beautiful article about what people miss about the restaurant industry and that place for social engagement. But in terms of what do I see in advance, in the surveying employers, prior to this, the last 4 years, the number one thing that employers were rated as their biggest challenge was recruiting and employees. And now it's pivoted to coronavirus. And so what does that mean? It means that our industry will innovate and will change like every other industry, and it will help to implement and establish the new social norms that have to go into place. That it's not waiting for things to go back as it reopens. It's looking at what all the guidelines are and how to then implement that as we reopen, and how to keep staff safe and how to keep patrons safe. And so I think what it looks like is really that the industry, as it's trying to interpret this, will need staff who are, and I said this before, trained. And so now, before it used to be that they would hire people would joke, we'll hire anybody who fogs up a mirror. But now we really are looking at individuals who can help that restaurant to implement the safety guidelines and to implement the social distancing guidelines and can to adjust to this new environment. And so we're definitely going to be coming back, and where we stand as an organization, we've always been an organization that is for, you know, second chances and first jobs, and we will be there again. And there's this low bar to get involved in so many directions to go, and it creates a workforce demand for people to do that.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. John, earlier on you talked about the grocery store industry, so to say, now being classified as essential. As you think about the value that Brown's Superstore had placed over the years on hiring individuals with a background, how do you think that will impact that value that you hold so dearly?
Yeah, so I feel like there's a couple of in our mission, a couple of our core values, the foundation of our mission, that really stand out and have helped us and benefited us both through training and guiding our managers in working with not just the returning citizen community, but the communities that we serve around our stores, the underserved communities that we serve around our stores, has been seek understanding and be flexible. They're two of our main core values, and we explain them through in such a way that, best probably to provide an example. So during the COVID crisis, if you're an employee of returning citizens, several returning citizens who were working, living in halfway houses were shut down for protection from the COVID. So they were on lockdown in essence. And as an employer, I think you have to go beyond the fact that that creates an attendance gap for the associate, but into the fact that the challenge that presents for that associate not to work, excuse the absence. And I think without some level of understanding and growing your understanding of the community that you're working with, in this case, the returning citizen community, I think you could very quickly make wrong decisions or decisions that are not helpful to that associate. But it goes beyond that. In working closely with returning citizens over the course of the last several years, you know, I think there's other barriers to employment that exist for returning citizens, and to that also the underserved communities around our stores, barriers as it relates to public transportation, barriers as it relates to just exactly what I said, kind of having the requirements that are thrust upon you, probation and parole and things that as an employer, I think it's so important that employers need to sort of look to understand the circumstances that the returning citizen community is dealing with to not only better serve them, but to better get the value of what just returning citizens do. We find that it's not just employment opportunities, but career pathways that we can provide to our associates. The grocery business is one not unlike the restaurant business, where you can start at a very entry-level position with a low barrier to employment. But I think beyond that is trying to show pathways to management positions. And I think it's best served by our work in this area that we have several managers who are working their way through the promotable chain, who can speak, who are returning citizens themselves, and then can speak to that community that works for us and show them that you can, through hard work and effort, make your way forward and create a career with a sustainable, not only sustainable employment, but a livable wage and move your way forward. I think one of the challenges as a entry-level business is bridging that gap between the entry period and the promotion period. And the grocery industry, certainly for us at ShopRite, as a unionized employer, is very seniority based. And so some of those challenges for us is getting the gap from entry level to promotability. And one of the things that we've used in conjunction and partnership with our unions is workforce development based training and credentials that are achieved prior to employment, either while they're inside or post release, where they're working through a program. We've utilized those credentials as well as just graduation of a program and define that as work experience, right? Because they've engaged in a program, whether it be the SOAR program through IC of Philadelphia or other various programs where they've worked their way through and got, in essence, work experience through their training. And it was a little bit of a gray area in the union, but we worked in partnership with our union partners to say that that is justifiable. We can hire that person at a higher rate of pay, and we can progress them through our promotion scales at a higher rate because they have that support and that development behind them. So I think when I use the term flexibility, I think that's the term employers need to look into this community. It's a very dedicated, loyal workforce. And my experience of working with returning citizens is not just good employment, but folks who are trying to make a different path in their life. And our one assistant store manager sort of explains that best when he sort of says, I could have got out and made a heck of a lot more money doing the wrong thing than I was being paid to try and do the right thing, but I was committed to changing my life and my family's life for my children. And I think as an employer, you have to recognize those barriers that exist. You have to have some transparency in the discussion that you're having. I think a couple of the other panelists mentioned some of that transparency. You can't ignore it, but you have to face it and you have to understand the challenges that exist and work in partnership with not just the associate, but the workforce development, as well as develop relationships with the local parole and things like that, that you have an understanding of some of the requirements that are needed. And then I think you can get through it to the back end and you get some really great success stories of folks who are turning their lives around and making a real difference. And we have a great experience in that area.
So thank you so much, John. In the interest of time, we have two uniquely positioned panelists, Genevieve and Donovan, because they're really working with multiple businesses across multiple industries. And we're in a period of time in our nation where there's a very interesting tension that we're experiencing. You have the full effect of COVID-19, but then you have this racial awakening as it relates to a recognition that there's significant social injustice, primarily against African Americans. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this tension that we're working through. Genevieve and Donovan, I mean, you guys could just take it from there. And then after your response, we're gonna do a Q&A. I know we're short on time, but we're gonna do a Q&A still because it's very important that participants get a chance to ask a few questions. So if you could hang in there with us, we'd really appreciate it. Okay.
I have a sneaking suspicion that Donovan and I could do this for the rest of the day. So, well, I don't even know Donovan, but we're gonna have to try to make this real short and sweet. I know the question that had been put to me in our prep calls had been, will we lose or gain momentum now? And 2 months ago at, the beginning of us figuring out what the, flipperty gibbets we're doing in COVID-19, with the world upside down, I would have said we're going to lose ground. We're going to be 2 steps back. We're going to be back to the setting we were in when we started our work over 6 years ago, which is nobody knew what second chance employment was. Nobody was for hiring people with criminal convictions. We had to literally start teaching people what all of those things meant and then explain why it was important and then show them how this was something valuable to them. Fast forward a few weeks and we find ourselves in a very different nation. So yes, COVID-19 still exists and is still very real, but we have this moment of great awakening where people all over the nation literally woke up one morning learning for the first time in many circumstances that the world is not just and equal for everybody, particularly in our country. And we'd be remiss if we didn't identify the fact that the overwhelming amount of overlap between the disproportionate impact of the legal system on Black men, women, and children's lives, and the area that we work in, which is reentry. And so when that is a job candidate presenting at an employer, there is potentially 2 things running against this person. Many times, one for sure, and often both things are completely out of their control. And so I'm going to say that I don't think we're going to lose momentum, but I think our momentum is going to shift. And I think it's a moment for those of us where we get to influence companies and influence the change makers inside of a company to think about things differently. It's not about, in my opinion, it's not about filling a quota. I get nervous when I hear the word diversity thrown around because I often see businesses thinking about it in a numbers game of, well, I've got one. That is not what it is. So when we talk about second chance employment, we have to be really clear that we're talking about creating inclusive areas. So whether that's, often we talk about that's inclusive ideas and experiences and thought processes. You're always supposed to hire the best person for the job, but that's irregardless of the criminal background. That background check is not the reason they shouldn't be getting that job unless it directly relates to the job you have open. Sorry, I could do this all day. So when we think about how we work with employers, I think we're going to be a little bit slow to start when we see jobs filling with more candidates with conviction histories. But I think we're going to see that it goes faster than it has historically because companies have to pay attention. We're in an age where people vote with their dollars. And so if they notice that companies over the last 6 months and the coming 6, 12, and 18 months are not responsive and not thoughtful, they're going to lose business because we know that the current, 3 different generations that are currently purchasing things that care about the social fabric of our communities are going to make that clear. So this is definitely an opportunity for us and for all of us on this call to think about how do we present our work and our services as a support for companies who are going to fail sometimes. But we need to be able to be there and create a space where they can fail quickly and iterate so that they can get it right. I'll stop because I really want to hear what Donovan has to talk about.
Thank you.
Well done. And thank you for taking up the majority of the points so that I don't have to really, reiterate that because, at this point, we'll be able to finish each other's sentences like Run DMC. Some of you guys may get that term, but others may not. So don't worry yourself. It's not that big of an issue. Not just messing around. So the, this moment right now represents a couple of things. Number one, COVID-19 and Racism 20 have put us in a couple of situations, right? Number one, it's created a captive audience. That's the first thing that is done in the history of man is created a global captive audience. Unfortunately, but fortunately, right, due to COVID-19, you have more people paying attention to the small things than ever before since the digital age. And on a global stage as well, which has never existed. So where the two intersect is something that's very interesting because, people have hit a certain saturation point in terms of the things that they typically would do to entertain themselves, to distract themselves. That coupled with the severe restrictions has put us in a situation where not only are we a captive audience, but the other component now starts to take place, and that is we're in this space where we have to change our behavior, right? So how we work, how we communicate in many ways, how, there are a lot of different things that we are forced to change. So we're in a period also where globally we have to change our behavior, and also globally our attention has been captured. So you have higher levels of sensitivity when it comes to certain things like what we're experiencing in terms of, the racism, the health pandemic, disproportionate access to resources, health disparities, the whole nine. But this is also a great time that while we're looking at changing behavior, we put some things on the agenda, right? We put some things on the radar, and in many ways, what we're seeing, especially as it relates to the level of frustration with where we are in terms of race relations, you're seeing a shift in perspective, right? You're seeing people that are more sensitive to the idea, more sensitive to the notion that due to your skin, you really actually have very little freedom, and due to just basically how you look, due to aesthetics. Well, let's kind of just transition just a degree or two over to being, a returning citizen, right? Due to something that took place, and this is a little different. Obviously, it may mean, there was a decision that was made, or it could also mean just due to their skin. whichever way, right? Some of us will never know, but to some extent, due to that, something that was outside of their control, or something that they even got control of by way of paying paying their dues, right? Either way, it leads to a clean slate. It leads to the ability to be seen as a person who can contribute in a very positive way. And what should happen as a result of that versus what is happening is something that we are now in a space and being more critical of in terms of, really recognizing it for what it is and its shortcomings. So right now, for many organizations like ours, we have the duty, the responsibility to bring before them great individuals who represent the best amongst our returning citizen population when it comes to not just employment opportunities, but also from an entrepreneur standpoint. We need to make sure that they have the proper amount of support in place, the back office in place to represent high levels of retention, of advancement, of mobility, and outcomes, so that at the end of the day, this can be seen as a promising practice that at some point grows to be a best practice. So ultimately, we're talking about shifting the perspective, but the number one way that we can do that is through time and repetition. So while the soil is very fertile and the clay is not hardened and we can mold some things, we need to be able to make sure that we get in there, provide the right kind of infrastructure to support the underserved communities and communities that are marginalized due to their skin, due to their backgrounds, and make sure that they also see that, should you take this chance to hire this individual, should you take this chance to bring this person on board or do business with this individual as an entrepreneur, that there's a village as well. There's a village of people, of organizations like ours that provide that additional support, because in many ways, you may be looking at this new relationship and say, but to be perfectly transparent with you, Donovan, I don't really know how to cultivate this relationship. And so we need to be there to say, hey, it's okay, look, we're holding your hand. It's all right. Let's take the step together. The water is fine. Just stick a toe in. It's going to be okay. We're here for the long haul. So developing some meaningful partnerships, some relationships, providing the additional cultural context so that things don't, not so many balls are going to get dropped, right? It's going to be some bumps and bruises, but that's okay. Letting them know that we're the trusted messenger that's going to function in that space to provide that buffer, if you will, to ensure, a certain kind of outcome. And then also, as Javier mentioned earlier, that understanding that we're still wonderfully human. There are going to be some mistakes, and not to expect, perfection because you're doing something that may be a little bit off from your normal comfort zone. But to understand that there's definitely some challenges that are going to exist in the near future, but we're here again to be that buffer to assist you through that rocky terrain. I'm gonna get off from there. Just leave it right there. Is that short enough?
And rich, by the way, thank you so much. A very, very rich conversation. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions. Please do ask. No, thank you so much, Genevieve and Donovan, for sharing your thoughts there.
Jason, there was a question that came up earlier in the session we did between meetings. Okay. If I could direct it towards Dennis. And so one of the barriers that we saw, the individuals that we serve, especially our returning community members, our returning citizens, is a lack of credit cards or the lack of credit to obtain a credit card. And so even when free services were made available for intranet, you still needed a credit card available to sign up for them. Are there any loopholes or inside information you may be able to share with us that we could help connect those who are the most in need of free internet services with that without the need for an actual credit card?
It's a point that honestly I haven't addressed in the past. So I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'd love to dig into why that policy exists, what's the history of it, what are some options as we move forward. Some policies exist for a long time for maybe there was rationale, some time back. So I would have to just dig into how that policy came about and if there are any options to kind of reconsider that.
Yeah, and thank you. not trying to put you on the spot. It's many organizations, just not Comcast. But since we had your attention, had to take the advantage of the opportunity to ask. And I believe it was Vanessa who brought it up in the session. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll take a look into that, and I can circle back with Jason on the feedback.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
And I'll extend that information to the team.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to try and find it, but there was a precedent set a while back where if you went into a bank, you were able to get a checking account. You may not be able to get credit, you may not have credit or anything like that, but you could still open a checking account. And so within a checking account, you could have a debit card issued so that you could still participate in things that you'd otherwise be unable to do. Something we've seen in our work is there's a lot of overlap between people that just don't trust financial institutions and don't have any interest in putting their money there, which then creates an additional barrier of not even being able to do the checking account and the debit card. And so there's definitely work that needs to be done in kind of the financial literacy realm of building trust with maybe community banks or credit unions so that people are less fearful of putting their very few assets in a space where they could then participate at kind of what would be said as like the normal bar as everybody else with at least a debit card.
So wonderful. I'm going to take 2 more quick questions with 2 quick responses, and then we're going to wrap up, if you don't mind. Any other questions? And on that note, it seems as if we do not have any additional questions. So with that said, we will wrap up the session now. Thank you so much, panelists, for taking the time. We really value your time. We know that you typically have a lot of other things that you could be doing with your time, but you taking the time to be with us today is a statement that you are here to be a solution. And as we seek to collaborate as a network, we will be calling on you in the future as we seek to navigate what we're all trying to figure out with this new normal, with COVID-19, but then also the racial awakening that we're all working through. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And we're so grateful for your time. You take care.